Welcome, everyone. I'm Jamie Parrott, Chief Operating Officer of the National Aesthetic Buying Group, MedResults Network. And on behalf of myself and our panelists and our panel sponsor, Bridgewater Holdings, we thank you for joining us this afternoon. And if you're on the East Coast, we appreciate you joining us during your happy hour. So to give the audience a little bit of context, over the last 6 months, we've received mixed feedback on how medical practices and medical spas have fared since the beginning of the pandemic to today. And while some of our medical practice members are now looking for the opportunity to expand in order to support the increasing demand for services, we've spoken to dozens of others who are struggling, and now they're considering opportunities to exit their business. So the major question in our industry is, now that we've moved past the worst of the pandemic, we hope, does a business decide to push forward with an aggressive growth strategy or close its doors? And also, how did we get here and how do we survive? So with these questions in mind, we brought together 4 heavy hitters in aesthetics, economics, and finance to share their knowledge and expertise with us about the current business and financial landscapes and how changes over the last year in these arenas have affected and will likely continue to affect the average aesthetic medical business. We're also going to take a little dive into topics such as marketing, new treatment modalities, business financing and regulations, and a whole lot more. So no topic is off limits today. And before I turn it over for introductions, I just want to encourage everyone joining us to participate at any time during the conversation. If you have questions or comments, don't hesitate to type it in the chat box, as we'll have tons of time after our initial dialogue to get to everyone. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Phillips, who's the founder of RivuvaMD and our sponsors of Bridgewater Holdings.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Also, thanks to the MedResults Network for giving us the platform to have this conversation. And I'm excited to be here as part of this distinguished panel of subject matter experts. And so initially, we're going to go around the horn and just give you a little bit of background on who we are. I'm Jim Phillips, and I'm the founder of RivuvaMD and Bridgewater Holdings. I began my career on Wall Street, not in plastic surgery or dermatology or med spas, back in the late 70s. And so I spent the first 25 years of my career doing investment banking and leverage buyouts, and really sort of through a fluke in 2012, I ended up as the chairman and CEO of the largest facial plastic surgery company in the world. So 225,000 facelifts later, you learn a little bit about the business. So I am excited to be part of the panel, and we're going to talk about really a broad spectrum of topics related to aesthetics. Unfortunately, Jay Lucas could not be here, but if anybody wants to interact with Jay, he's one of our partners, and he is our sort of in-house expert on skincare and formulation laboratories. And Jay, as you may have seen through the introductory information, was one of the founders of Bain Capital. So let me throw it over to Dennis to give a little bit of his background.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I actually go back to a little company called Hire Schulte with breast implants that many years ago. But that led into a career in which I've had the opportunity to lead companies in sort of the 4 verticals. With about almost 20 years with Mentor Corporation, which acquired Hire Schulte. After that, I actually also had a chain of med spas called Spa Medicus that we ran that for about 5 or 6 years before it was bought by a private equity company. From there, I went on to a laser company. So I was into the capital equipment market for a while with Reliant Lasers. From there, I moved on to injectables, into Bioform, which was acquired by MERS. And then after that, about 5 years with a skincare mask company that I sold off to a Korean company. So almost a little over 40 years in the business, all 4 verticals, but most recently my board positions have included the executive chairman of Suneva, Suneva is a company which is building a portfolio of regenerative aesthetic products. So after all the years and all the different verticals, we're sort of creating a new vertical with regenerative aesthetics. And that includes autologous fat, PRP, exosomes, etc., all used either individually in different aesthetic procedures or used to augment or help other aesthetic procedures. So it's really been quite exciting after all these years of being in those different areas to have something which is new and exciting and emerging in the field. So that pretty much covers almost 40 years in the business.
Very good. Mark Richards?
Thought we were going to Mark Greenspan first, but no, that's so I've been about 30 years in the plastic surgery field and made the transition along the way from doing a lot of complex reconstructive microsurgery, that sort of thing, to doing at this point all aesthetic plastic surgery. But what Dennis said was very interesting. It's rejuvenative aesthetics. And rejuvenation is really going to be the key point now, and it's a key point going forward, and it's only going to get larger, better, bigger, and more important for the rest of society. Currently, my time's split about half and half between doing aesthetic surgery, a lot of corrective aesthetic surgery as well, and being involved in bioidentical testosterone pellet therapy. Which really is a fancy way for saying I'm trying to undo some of the poisoning that the plastics in the environment has caused men and women. And this has become a much bigger field than I ever anticipated when I first started becoming involved in it. I became involved about 12 years ago when I was a co-scientific director for the largest aesthetic medicine surgery conference in the world in Paris called ONCAS. And they started talking about anti-aging. My bias is that most of the anti-aging lectures and conferences out there are selling a lot of snake oil, but there are pearls in there. And when you find pearls, some of them can be life-changing and very important. So I see a very exciting role ahead in the future for what we're doing with rejuvenative aesthetics. There's great new products out there for non-invasive, which is where most of the med spas, of course, will be focusing. And more on that later in the talk.
Okay. Mark Greenspan?
Thank you, Jim. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Jim, and MedResults. So I've been in the space since 2002, been managing and marketing plastic surgeons as well as doing consulting. I owned a group of med spas between 2002 2008 called Light Touch. Exited in 2014. I founded BeautyFix Med Spa, which I took over a failing med spa that was probably losing, probably about $10,000 a month, that had a minimal amount of revenue. It was doing about $30,000 a month and grown it to a 7-figure a month business in about close to 6 years at this point, just utilizing an omni-channel marketing approach combined with a lot of just highly experienced clinicians and really paying attention to a lot of the details related to lead management. Recently, we've launched BeautyFix Plastic Surgery as well. We've been getting a lot of requests from our med spa patients. Obviously, there's only so much you can do with injections and equipment. So we've also partnered with 4 different board certified plastic surgeons at this point, and recently rolled out BeautyFix Plastic Surgery with Dr. Stephen Fallick, and we're rolling out GemLift, which is a patented facelift next month. So happy to be here, and I guess we'll get into the med spa space a little further later on. So back to you, Jamie.
Great. Well, thank you all for your introductions. I think to kick it off, we're going to be breaking this down into a couple different segments. And to get us started, we have Dennis Condon. Dennis is going to be speaking about the state of aesthetics. So Dennis, feel free to take it away. Oh, Dennis, I think you're on mute.
You're muted.
Again, thank you very much. as I mentioned before, it's been an exciting career, being in all the different aspects of the aesthetic field. I've seen the field grow tremendously, from some of the first lasers to some of the first injectables. It's really has evolved into something which the non-surgical component has also become a very big part of the field. And as I mentioned before, the regenerative aesthetic side of things is something which I think fits nicely into sort of the state of natural. Everybody wants the natural solution to things. And so everything that we do in regenerative aesthetics includes something that you extract from the body, you process, and you re-inject it. And that's become a big part of the business. And we're now seeing, for instance, we're seeing different components of fat used in hair replacement. We're seeing it used as fillers. One of my companies is a breast implant company in Costa Rica, and a lot of work is being done now with fat for breast augmentation and breast reconstruction. And of course, the dermal filler space is being rapidly growing with fat. So I think the overall marketplace, we're going to see this trend towards regenerative natural tissue, and that's going to change the market completely. Some of the larger companies are starting to get into it, but some of the smaller companies are testing the market and really seeing the advantages there. So that's where I see the future going, is the regenerative space, the natural tissue, and those are things with less complications and things that actually have a longer lasting effect. So we're really excited about that field, and I think you're going to see it across the board, especially in the non-surgical. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else have comments to add to that? The state of the aesthetics, where it's headed?
I would just, I would add that definitely I'm looking forward to anything that will help bolster the non-surgical part of our business. Obviously, fillers is a huge part of our business. Actually, 85% of our revenue is filler and Botox and other types of toxins like the Dysport. And it's been much greater than I had anticipated in 2014. Because back in 2002, when we were doing it, you weren't having a 21-year-old girl coming in who wanted to get her jewelry contoured or doing a lot of stuff we currently do. So definitely looking forward to some of the things that was just mentioned.
There's actually a very good economic benefit for both the patient and for the practice in the fillers using the autologous fat. For instance, one device out there is a charge of $500 to the practice. That device can be used to extract 50 cc's of autologous fat. It will process it in a single syringe and process it down to very clean, viable fat, about 25 cc's. So you're really looking at more volume the patient can have. You're looking at more affordable volume, because essentially, whereas some sort of a filler might cost in the neighborhood of $200 to $300 a cc, by the time you process down the fat, what you're really getting is something in the neighborhood of $25 a cc. So you can do more with it. It's longer lasting, and it's more affordable, and also more profitable for the practice as well.
I think you're going to see increased regulations. Also, the patient is looking for efficacy, so stuff that doesn't work. Mark had mentioned sort of snake oil. Snake oil is out, and stuff that is proving to be having a tangible result is in. So, but a lot of things happening in the space.
What's interesting is that from a regulatory standpoint, one of the devices I mentioned actually has a regulatory approval that's very general for extracting, processing, and re-injecting fat, and that's the regulatory approval, compared to synthetic dermal fillers, which need a different indication approval for every spot they go in, whether it's nasolabial fold or the cheeks or the forehead. Those require different indications, therefore different clinical studies, and a lot of work, so that the around the autologous tissue, the regulatory side is more reasonable and much better for both patient and physician.
I think that you have a question, or shall I go ahead?
You go ahead, Dr. Richards.
Okay, so I think from the 30-year viewpoint, having done everything from fat injections to PRP to stuff off the shelf, there's a huge palette that's available, and some of these med spas are going to have physicians on site that are actually actively involved in doing the treatments, and some of them are going to have physicians that are medical directors, and they're going to have ancillary personnel that are doing treatments. And so the treatments are going to have to be tapered, I think, to some degree, according to who's doing them and their expertise. The regulations vary from state to state. So the med spas, certainly in some places, it's going to need to be a physician harvesting the fat and injecting it. And in some states, maybe not. Maybe a non-physician person can do it. But I think that the takeaway is that right now there's some fantastic fillers. There's new things like, or relatively new, like thread lifts that are being done much better. Fillers of different consistency that are being done much better and have better applications. And it just requires training. Once they have proper training, pretty much any type of med spa can go ahead and start using this. And I've noticed that since the pandemic hit, that people are spending a lot of time on Zoom like us, and they're seeing their face for many hours a day, where they maybe look in the mirror once a day when they, brush their hair in the morning. And so they're coming in droves. They're coming in droves for non-invasive stuff because they want to get the non-invasive stuff and then be back on the Zoom meetings tomorrow morning. I'm also now getting a bunch of them, I guess, who have been on Zoom long enough that they want their plastic surgery done as well, because now they can take off 4 or 5 days and recover at home while they're working on their computers. So they're rushing to get that done before they're forced to go back to the office. So I think there's a lot involved here. And then what I mentioned in the beginning, I have a book that hopefully will be coming out this summer on the need for testosterone pellets for men and women. And that can be really a drop-in clinic at most any med spa or physician practice with proper training. And it's not like the phthalates or the endocrine disrupting chemicals from plastics are going to disappear from our atmosphere and water and food anytime soon, unfortunately. So this is going to be this is where aesthetics and rejuvenation meet. Without it, we're going to keep having worsening epidemics of diabetes and obesity and cancers and all those other things. So they're going to be looking to the med spas and the forward-thinking providers to go ahead and allow them to live a much better quality life that's much healthier.
Just to segue on one of the topics that you mentioned, Dr. Richards, we did have a question from one of our audience members who had asked about everyone's thoughts on Pdo Threads. Just one modality we're starting to see a lot more of. Do any of you want to elaborate on your thoughts or your experience with Pdo Threads?
I love Pdo Threads. I'll be happy to elaborate on that and then pass over my time. Pdo Threads are a tool. I use Nova Threads, but there's a couple other companies that use the Pdo Threads. It has to do with the compound that's in the threads. The threads are dissolvable, for those that don't know. They usually dissolve over about 6 months. The companies vary by the type of hooks that they have in the threads. Usually there's a little drop of local anesthetic put into the skin, and then you just puncture the skin with an 18-gauge needle, and that's enough of an opening in the skin to slide the little smooth aluminum tube containing the thread into the tissues. There's various techniques. Once you put those threads in, you pull the tube out, the thread stays in, and you can pull on it and lift the tissues. You can also lift the tissues and then push the thread in and then uncover it, and the thread will hold the tissues in place. So there's lots of new techniques. It's really only limited by the imagination of all of us doing it. So I think it's pretty exciting. It lasts about a year. I tell people a year. It can last up to 2 years, but if I tell them a year and it lasts a year and 3 months, they love me. If I tell them it lasts, 2 years and it lasts a year and 6 months, they hate me. So, I tell them a year, and the threads turn into your own collagen, and they provide a lot of support. They also have really skinny, smooth Pdo threads with no hooks on them. And those are to fill in wrinkles. And those I've been using and experimenting with those in some areas that typically there weren't good solutions, such as the wrinkly inner arms on older women, where what am I going to do with this? And I'm like, well, it's not a surgical solution, and there really isn't great solutions. You can try injecting it with Sculptra, but sliding a bunch of these smooth threads right inside the dermis allows collagen formation to happen, and they get at least a 50% improvement.
That's great. Thank you. If anybody has any additional comments, Absolutely. You can make those comments now, or we're going to move on to the state of the economy. Okay. Well, it sounds like, Jim, why don't you get us started on the state of the economy?
Yeah, I'm much better equipped to talk about the economy than collagen. And so, you know, when I ran the private bank at Bank of America in California, we had a very substantial amount of assets under management on the equity side. We were always excited if we could get 10 to 12% return annually. And I noted that this morning, Apple was up 6% this morning. So, you know, the Dow is over 34,000. And so one would look at that and think that, hey, we're in great shape. Well, you know, actually, I think the economy is in mixed shape. And I'll throw out some facts and figures that I think is important for the business owners out there that are trying to determine, you know, where do we go from here and what's ahead. So basically in 2020, all GDPs of all countries worldwide were down except for China. And the US GDP fell below 20 trillion. And more troubling was the fact that the US national debt actually increased to 28 trillion. So according to the so-called World Bank rules of country solvency, the US is insolvent because its national debt is substantially greater than its GDP. Now, interestingly, in that sort of GDP number, about 60% of US GDP is driven by small business. And so we are looking at a situation where about 30% of small businesses are either insolvent or heading in that direction right now. So we're going to have a huge hit to GDP in 2021. And the government's attempt to shore things up was with these SBA programs, the Payroll Protection Program, and also the Economic Impact Loan Program, which provided a certain amount of relief. But my firm did some analysis and some modeling in terms of how much capital do you really need to sort of survive the trauma that we've all been through. And we determined that if you look at 2019 revenues and take 20% of that number, that's roughly the amount of capital that you need to be comfortable that you can get to the other side. The SBA subventions really provided about 8% of that. And so companies still need to go out and raise capital, increase their level of profitability, or use the usual tricks, you know, pay the payables more slowly and create sources of cash. But we're really in a very, very challenging time from an economic standpoint. And going forward, you know, the future is uncertain, and there's a real specter out there of the potential for inflation, because the most recent announcement was a $6 trillion incentive. That all has to be paid back. And really the only way you can pay it back is with inflated dollars. So it's probably not going to happen in the near term, but a couple years out, look for very significant spikes in costs out there.
Would any of our other panelists like to comment on the state of the economy or add on to that?
I think, Jamie, what we've seen with the pandemic has obviously created a tremendous slowdown in a number of the different practices and so forth. It is interesting, though, what we have seen, and I have companies that are involved in either capital equipment or facial aesthetics or breast aesthetics. And what we've seen is the return of business and sort of the facial aesthetic side of things is much, much more rapid. So folks, I think there's actually a Zoom effect where people have seen themselves on Zoom at work, et cetera, and they're starting to notice certain weaknesses they may think they have. And so we really are seeing in my facial aesthetics company, seeing a much quicker rebound than in the other two companies. So it's kind of an interesting pandemic effect, if you will, or even Zoom effect.
Yeah, I should mention that plastic surgery and dermatology almost across the board is really back to sort of 2019 levels. I think in some cases exceeding that, but the med spa space is still experiencing mixed results. You have, you have companies like BeautyFix that probably has the highest per square foot revenue of any med spas in the country. And you have some smaller med spas that are having some challenges and still trying to recover. So, there's definitely, the Zoom effect is definitely real. And if you ask any plastic surgeon kind of what their volume was in September, October, it was pretty substantial due to pent-up demand.
Just to add on to your comments, Jim and Dennis, we got a question from the audience that says, fourth quarter 2020 was great for us. Was it a false positive? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that was a false positive that we should start to make changes in preparation for a decline, or are we going to continue to see this success?
Well, it's interesting, and I obviously with 3 different companies I'm on the board of, we kind of see the curve, and we did in all 3. We did see a return to sort of 2019 levels in the fourth quarter. However, in all 3 companies, the first quarter of this year has been spectacular. One of the companies were up 40%. So I do think that pent-up demand is unleashing this year and will unleash throughout the rest of the year, because even today, there are some folks who are afraid to kind of go back into the public, back into doing things that are close up. So this year, we expect to be very good in all three of my companies. So hopefully the market will stay like that. And also, of course, the economy is good. So people are happy.
Yeah, there's definitely a strong demand for aesthetic services. If you look back into the 2008 dislocation, women were spending money on their Botox no matter what. And so I think there's still a strong desire to look and feel better. And but there's this notion called the dead cat bounce. And we might be experiencing a dead cat bounce, which means that don't get overly exuberant because of current results. I think it's important to be cautious. A lot of companies have realized that they can operate on lower staffing levels. So, potentially the level of revenues that bounced back in the third and fourth quarter of 2020 were very profitable quarters. So I think that it's, do you go out and start expanding? Do you start buying lots of equipment? I just think this is time to be cautious because we're really in uncharted territory. So it's one thing to look at a 2008, but we really have a 2008 combined with a sort of 2017 Spanish flu. No one globally has ever seen this. The companies have never been shut down for 4 months continuously. There's no model to analyze this. So we're really in uncharted territory, which what you do in uncharted territory is you act conservatively.
I might add a little bit of a different viewpoint to that. I think a lot depends on how you were able to handle the initial 3 to 9 months of the shutdown starting in March of last year. If you qualified and you could get PPP and you could, keep everything afloat and not go heavily in debt, then there was a big demand that started up in the last quarter of last year. Fortunately for me, and unfortunately for my colleagues that I have not yet trained in doing pellet therapy, during the whole shutdown, I was still as an essential person providing testosterone pellets because people just felt horrible. And it turns out that testosterone actually gave them a much better survival if they got COVID. So that was good. So I managed to get through that part. However, once things started coming in the last quarter of last year, I thought, wow, this is great. If this just stays like this will be fantastic. But then the first quarter of this year blew away the last quarter of last year to the point where I wish there were 2 of me. And I haven't felt that way since before 2008. It just is, it's a K-shaped recovery. But I think the bottom of the K is being lifted up now. There's a lot of money that was given away. And there's going to be a lot more that seems to be targeted. And all that money is going to get spent. And people are going out, and it reminds me of what I've read about the Roaring 20s. I mean, people got through the Spanish flu, World War I, and they were ready to party and go out there. And I think, well, you know, restaurants are still sort of semi-shut down. Travel, you really don't want to go to foreign countries because they're all dying of COVID. So what are they going to spend it on? They're going to travel in the US, and they're going to spend it on, you know, your aesthetic med spa. And that's where we are right now. And I don't really see that changing for the rest of this year. I think it's just going to continue to be a crazy increase in business.
So I'd like to maybe, you know, consider kind of skipping to med spas and, you know, have Mark comment, because we've sort of touched on a lot of the kind of general medicine kind of plastic surgery components. But according to industry data, there's 5,000 plus med spas in America, and apparently a significant chunk are experiencing severe challenges or potentially facing insolvency. So wanted to have kind of Mark Greenspan talk about the sort of state of med spas and what his experience has been.
Thanks, Jim. I mean, just like, you know, we're alluding to, it's been in flux. There are some med spas that are at the brink of bankruptcy and have ongoing capital needs issues, and then there's other spas like ourselves that things are booming. You know, it's been interesting that people actually have used their stimulus money to come in here and do treatments. So I've heard tons of anecdotal stories from our managers that people are coming directly here with their $1,400, or they've made money on cryptocurrency, or they've made money on GameStop. And yeah, we had a lady who made money on GameStop, and then she came back 2 months later and made money on Dogecoin and spent, you know, upwards of, you know, $20,000 with us. So it's just like some things like that are just kind of driving some of these sales. But you know, at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to what people did during the pandemic. You know, for ourselves, we leveraged virtual consultations very early on. We were able to, you know, sell our services through our online store, and we were able to pivot really quickly. And we kept our marketing team on. We kept our sales team on throughout the pandemic, the shutdown. And, you know, our 2020 numbers were even with 2019, and 2021, we've been up, you know, 25% plus. So it's been good. But, you know, we hear through our reps who sell products, you know, fillers and things of that nature to our competitors. And, you know, they're hearing a different story from a lot of these other spas where they're just, you know, struggling to kind of stay afloat. So I think it really just comes down to, you know, the infrastructure and the marketing, you know, coming into the pandemic. And, you know, pandemic just, you know, accelerated some things that may have happened to some of these businesses down the line. So, any questions from?
Yeah, a question that I think is really relevant to what you were talking about, marketing and your success. If someone's tried digital ads and social media and they're not satisfied with their results, what would you tell them, or what have you done differently?
There's a bunch of things. I mean, you have to first ask yourself, have you, you know, hired the right company to assist you with your ads? Have you invested enough time and resources to those ads? Do you have a means to track and quantify, you know, what you're spending? You know, do you have a lead management system in place? What happens when somebody calls your facility or fills out a contact form? Is there any lead nurturing, or is there any follow-up, or do they just get a a receptionist on the phone who bundles the phone call, or if they don't book right away, that's kind of the end of the story right there. So I think they have to look at, also the creative that they're putting out there. Are they putting out compelling content for somebody to actually scroll through their feed of Instagram or Facebook or now TikTok? Is it going to make them stop and pause and show interest? But I think a lot of it is just not having the follow through, and in a lot of cases, a lot of people just don't know the right firm or the right individual to hire because they just don't know enough to vet them properly. So personally, we generally for every dollar we spend, we're seeing a 3 to 4x return on ad spend. So if you're not able to quantify it, you really need to take a really hard look at that and just find somebody to assist you with it.
Well, that's great. You bring up a topic of advertising. If someone were to ask you, how much should I spend on advertising and marketing? Do you have what would be your advice?
Well, again, it goes back to infrastructure. You shouldn't spend a significant amount of money on ads if you don't have the personnel to, pick up the phone calls or be able to answer a chat, pretty much immediately. But, generally speaking, if you're looking to produce, let's call it $150,000 in revenue for the month, you're in a growth phase, I would say about 10% of that. So I'd say be prepared to spend about $15,000 to produce 150,000, and also account for probably $2,000 to $4,000 a month to have an ad agency or an individual help manage those ads, and probably a couple thousand a month to use the proper software to help facilitate a lot of these things. And obviously have the staff to be able to perform those procedures and have the bandwidth for the type of volume, assuming you've hired the right person and you're getting in a significant amount of leads.
That's great. So I think since we've kind of run through our basic topics, maybe it's a good time to start taking some questions. And I'll start with a question. Will aesthetic procedures be subject to competitive downward pricing pressure? Any of you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I do think we will see more and more of that as there are more companies that come out, for instance, with toxins. I think we have 4 toxins now. We have 2 on the horizon. In the international business, I saw when we were doing business with a toxin in Korea, we were the 3rd toxin on the market. And by the time, there were 4 or 5 years later, there were 6 toxins on the market, and the pricing pressure was tremendous. So it's basic, supply and demand, and a number of different companies that are out there, especially if the products are similar, and most of the toxins are similar. So I do think there's a pricing pressure coming. I've seen it in the marketplace, but primarily in those products that are similar and have 4 or 5 different brands.
That's great. Another question from the audience. The travel industry is gearing up for a big second half of 2021. Do you think that we will be competing for those dollars, and what other industries will we be competing against for those dollars? That's a good one.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I'm not, this is like telling the future, and I'm notoriously bad at that. So, yeah, sure. I think there's a certain amount of discretionary income that people have to spend. They've been given a lot of it, and it seems like the government wants to give more of it. I think the travel industry is going to come back quite a bit, but you have to remember, if you look overseas, there's a lot of places, in Europe and other places that people tend to go that are shut down. And they don't look like they're doing a really great job at getting everybody vaccinated. And I'm not so sure there's going to be a lot of world travel. There's going to be a lot of domestic travel, maybe down to the Caribbean and Mexico, Canada, but not a lot of international travel. And about something like a third of restaurants are closed. So that's going to be a little tougher to get reservations. I think, as the panelists were discussing earlier today before the meeting started, one of them was trying to get reservations and could eat at like midnight, so that wasn't very acceptable. So yeah, I think there's it depends on what people think is important. And if they're priding their appearance right now, they've been locked in, they've been hidden behind masks, and they want to see everybody's faces. They want everybody to see their face. And I don't think it's going to be an either or situation. I think it's going to be both. I think people are going to want to go out and they're going to want to do things and they want to look their best.
So I live on the water in Miami, and this morning I was excited to see the Disney cruise ship making the turn in the Miami basin. And, you know, I think that our tastes are changing, and in the travel space, people are really looking for experiences. And I think we're seeing a parallel move in aesthetics where in addition to sort of fixing areas where we think, you know, we need a little boost, wellness is going to become, you know, more important. So, you know, fix the outside and fix the inside. So we'll likely see, you know, more of what Mark's doing, which is the testosterone pellets. And, you know, there's lots of stuff that are going into med spas, including, you know, some mental health services, treatment of drug-resistant depression and PTSD. So, you know, I think that we're going to see more, we're going to be addressing the patient in a much broader way going forward.
That leads me to some interesting questions about alternative therapies and different modalities that are currently being added to practices. And you've all brought up some really interesting ideas. What about alternative wellness procedures like ketamine therapy? We've been hearing about it. Can any of you comment on whether that's becoming a popular modality or treatment?
Sure. So there's now a lot of clinicals on the use of ketamine as to clear the sort of neuro pathways for people that have everything from bipolar disorder to it's super effective for PTSD and depression. The problem with ketamine therapy is that it's a Schedule 3 DEA drug. It is addictive, and so the patient really has to be on and off of it within about a 12-week period, and then transition into a let's call it a functional medicine environment. So the ketamine basically creates a kickstart to fix the problem, and then we have to figure out what caused the problem to begin with, which could be anything from diet to you know, issues in childhood, that sort of thing. And that begins kind of like a longer treatment protocol. All of these things, right now, the two largest companies in that space are doing this via telemedicine 100%, but it would be very easy to move this into a clinical or a med spa type environment.
That's interesting. And I think just touching on the topic of alternative wellness procedures, ketamine therapy being one of them, and going back to Dennis's comments on regenerative medicine, we got another question from the audience. And I think part of this you all have answered well, but do you think the pandemic has increased the demand for aesthetic services, have more patients enter the market, and should we be offering more non-traditional services? Any comments on that?
Yeah, again, I think that there has been this Zoom effect where folks really are seen all day long staring at themselves on the screen, and they're noticing things they didn't notice before. And that's why I say is that the company I have that does most of the facial aesthetic treatments has been the busiest and the quickest to respond. So I do think that we're really going to see more and more of that. I noticed today that with the pandemic, and as many times as I've been on Zoom or Blue Jeans or any other one of the communication platforms, that more and more now when I have a call with just a couple people or sometimes even with a single person, that we'll go ahead and put it up on Zoom. It's just more personal. We're used to it. It's easy to do. So I do think communication is going to be much more visual in the future, which will bring about more attention to the face and things people wish to have done.
Again, that's a great segue into another question. What will be the role of telemedicine moving forward?
This is, I always found this in my space to be just, how am I going to do telemedicine? I mean, you know, people are coming to me, they want to consult for surgery. I've done Zoom consults for, you know, facial stuff, but I've done probably more Zoom calls for breast reduction, breast augmentation, tummy tucks, liposuction, which sort of begs to answer, why are we having a boom of this? Is this the Zoom meetings they're having with their friends? I don't know. I don't know how to answer it. Ultimately, you need to see the tissues, and you need to touch the tissues, and you need to feel the tissues, and you certainly can't do therapy over the phone. So for the stuff in the aesthetic industry and for the things in the rejuvenative medicine industry, it can't be done by telemedicine. For things in mental health, like Jim was talking about, certainly that you can open the way for telemedicine, although I still think there's a strong draw and a strong connection to the patient that you have with a one-on-one in person. I don't know if Mark Greenspan's figured out how to do, he does magic in New York, but I don't know if he's figured out how to put in fillers and do machine treatments over the phone, but it'd be wonderful if he could, and he could tell me how to do it.
Well, we haven't figured out how to do that yet, but we have figured out how to pre-qualify plastic surgery patients with consultants. So we've been able to pre-screen patients, make sure they fit the criteria, they meet the proper BMIs, and are relatively healthy from their consent form, from their questionnaires, and we're able to go through a thorough evaluation, as much as you can do, through telemedicine. And at that point, when we get somebody who's actually very interested in the procedure and they're medically qualified as much as we could tell and financially qualified, they then go ahead and meet the surgeon at that point, where we've been able to take a deposit through telemedicine. And I'm actually very surprised at how many people are willing to give $1,000 deposit. Obviously it's refundable if they go ahead and see the plastic surgeon and they realize they're not a candidate for some reason, and we've missed it. But we're actually doing really well with that on the surgery side, even though that's kind of been like 3 months of the business on the plastic surgery side. But with med spas, we're doing a ton of virtual consultations as well. People want to know what can be done. They want to know what the price is, and they'd rather not get on a subway, to come here, if they can avoid it. But, since the vaccines and things of that nature, a lot more consultations have come back in, but still we find the need for virtual consults now. I think people have gotten almost spoiled into wanting as much information over the phone without kind of schlepping into the office. So for us, it's kind of we're never going back to just in-person consults. It'll always be in person and virtual. And right now we're about 80% in person. I'm sorry, about 70% in person, about 30% virtual. But we'll see where that goes. But that's how we plan to scale, is through virtual consultants.
Yeah, I would say that I'm probably about 90% in person and probably less than 10% virtual. But the virtual has been basically used by people that are too busy, or there's a distance issue, and so they want to look at it. But what you said about pre-qualification is very important, and the percent that actually book, that do the teleconsult, is extremely high. So I don't want to come across as though I think that's really a waste of time. It's not. It's just ultimately, as Mark alluded to, you have to see the patient, the plastic surgeon being me, has to see the patient in person, touch them, feel them, see what the issues really are, and give the A-OK. So there's always that question. Yep, you put your deposit down, we're going to have you do your surgery, but you have to know that if the doctor sees you and there's some contraindication, that we're going to give you your money back and surgery's not going to get done.
Yeah, sure.
So the pandemic really the pandemic really accelerated a number of trends that were already in motion, and telemedicine is definitely one. So there was a move towards increased adoption of telemedicine in medicine generally, not just aesthetics. And the pandemic really accelerated that. And people like Mark at BeautyFix sort of figured out how to kind of work that into their business model. I mean, clearly, if you can engage over the telephone or online, the numbers that I normally look at when we're acquiring med spas, we want to keep the marketing spend to 10%. I want to keep the staffing to about 25%. Well, this is a way to potentially reduce the staff delivery component. But again, 20 years ago, I was selling investments for a living. And if you ever told me that that would be something you could do online, I'd say, no, I have to see the body language. I have to physically be there. I have to see if their pupils dilate. It's not something you can do via telemedicine. But I think that, telemedicine is here to stay. And in certain areas, it will be more prevalent. Med spas certainly need to kind of look at this option.
You mentioned staffing, Jim. Another good question. Should I return to my 2019 staffing levels? Does anyone want to weigh on that?
You don't have to. I mean, 2019, we were in one of the most robust economies in the history of the country. And so I think people tended to be fat, dumb, and happy. And so there really wasn't an interest in kind of cutting corners and, scrimping and saving. But what happened is that because we had to skinny down in the second quarter of 2020, people learned how to be more productive in effect. So I think that, the new, more productive model is the way to go. And in terms of, do you return to 2019 levels? Probably not, unless you're driving revenues that are greater than you were driving in 2019.
And while we have you talking, Jim, just to help those that may be struggling and looking for options, do you think there will be more government subventions like the PPP program?
Unfortunately, I think the government funding is really going in a different direction now, and there may be some additional funding for larger companies, but small business is sort of on its own. There are some interesting options that are out there that the government has made available. In the first CARES Act, they really, for companies with revenues under 3 million, they really reduce the bar in terms of what would be required to seek bankruptcy protection. So, that's a potentially cost-effective option for a lot of companies that are looking for a breather, and that's contained in the initial CARES Act. But I think that the government really fell somewhat short in terms of funding this 20% target gap that we had envisioned, and so it's friends and family, raise capital, increase profitability. Probably need, if you took full advantage of the government programs, you probably need about another 10% of your 2019 revenues to have a comfortable runway to be able to thrive in the years ahead.
So just keeping on that topic, what options would a struggling med spa have in terms of SBA or private capital or sale?
Well, we're active in that space, and it's all about valuation, so that how you value a plastic surgery practice versus a derm practice versus a med spa, you know, there's this thing called EBITDA, which is basically profits. And so derm practices, the last major private equity acquisition was in March of 2020. That went for 13 times profits. You know, I think those opportunities are out there still for plastic surgery and dermatology. In terms of med spas, you know, really potentially looking at multiples of revenues. So, or fractions of revenue. So if you have a you know, med spa that is doing, you know, did $500,000 in 2019, it may, you know, on a liquidation basis, may be worth 150 or 200,000 today. If somebody thinks that's in a viable market and they can turn it around. The other alternative that the owner has is to upgrade their procedures. So start doing more, you know, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, threading, microneedling. It's going to be tough to switch from, you know, Botox to Evolus and generate a significant boost in profits. So it requires a fundamental change, then a total reevaluation of how much money you're spending on equipment. So so while I can generalize for plastic surgery and dermatology, for med spas, it's really completely customized depending on the circumstances.
Another question on that topic from the audience. If I want to sell my med spa, do you know who we can go to in order to get our house in order? Any recommendations?
Yeah, there are a number of, you know, companies out there that are looking at rolling out med spas. I mean, we are our Bridgewater Holdings company is one such entity. So if you want to find out more about Bridgewater, go to Bridgewater2020holdings.com, and the password for the med spa space is my spa, and that'll kind of give you how we approach acquisition of med spas in this environment. But you know, there are many options other than acquisition. So I'm happy to engage with med spa owners and kind of lay out their options, which there are many.
I want to bring it back to treatment modalities, devices, some of the topics you guys have already discussed. We had a question from the audience. Can you do that? This is going back to hormone replacement therapy and telemedicine. Can you do the hormone replacement therapy by telemed only? I wanted to open it up to you to respond.
I'll unmute there. The answer is a little bit yes, but mostly no. I train doctors all over the world in bioidentical hormone pellet therapy so that they can do it in their own practice. There's a lot of, you can certainly do a consult on telemedicine for the bioidentical hormone therapy, but there's no way that these pellets can be inserted at home by the individual themselves. So it's something that I think is going to become standard of care in this country. It's something that I've been told by the Vice President of World Health for the United Nations and the Bill and Melinda Gates Director for NIH would probably reduce Medicare costs by 30%, which is probably why pharma doesn't want it to happen. There's going to be a big need for a lot of people to learn how to do this. But ultimately, the patient has to be in your office in order to have the bioidentical testosterone pellets put into their fat. And the return for the practitioner is good. You know, for each female or male, doesn't matter. Right now, 2/3 of my patients, or almost 2/3 of my patients, are female for this. The revenue return after the cost of pellets is around $2,000 a year per patient. So you know, the numbers work for the provider. It's very rewarding. The complications are almost nothing, and it's sort of a win-win. Something that I think, you know, med spas are uniquely situated to do if there is a physician or a nurse practitioner there, and they have a closer relationship with their clients. They're not dealing with insurance, And it's important. It's important for society as a whole, and I think it's important for their business.
Thank you for that. Just to keep with the topic of modalities that we can add to the practice, this really touches on devices, maybe in your wheelhouse, Mark. Is Cool Sculpting still the biggest draw out there, or should I invest in other devices like MSculpt to increase patient traffic?
So, Cool Sculpting still has a lot of brand recognition, but MSculpt has made a lot of noise over the last few years. We've recently purchased an MSculpt Neo. We're also in the midst of purchasing a new Cool Sculpting Elite that's being delivered shortly. But Cool Sculpting doesn't have the same type of marketing that they had previously, 3 or 4 years ago, before actually Elegant purchased them from Zeltiq. They kind of let off on the gas on the marketing budget. So, I wouldn't buy a Cool Sculpting or an MSculpt thinking that just the name itself is going to draw in a significant amount of patients to pay off the machine. I think you really need to look at your own plan to market the product yourself. And the brand recognition helps, of course, but don't just look at Elegant, owns Cool Sculpting to kind of save you and bring patients to your door. But again, it has brand recognition, but not to the same level of interest as it was in 2017, 18, especially with MSculpt disrupting the market and other devices like TrueSculpt ID has also taken some market share. So there are other options aside from Cool Sculpting, as opposed to when they first launched, I believe it was 2012 or so. So it definitely has changed.
So
the other issue with these devices is the cost and the ability to finance. So the playing field is not really level, so that doctors have a huge advantage in terms of their ability, doctors with good credit, to finance the equipment. But if you're a med spa and you're the owner and you're not a doctor, plan on paying 100% cash, or doing a second mortgage on your house to buy the equipment. It's MSculpt is roughly the price of a 2020 Ferrari, so it's not cheap.
Another question from the audience, and this one's more for Dr. Richards and Mark. Do either of you offer electrolysis?
So we don't offer electrolysis, but we do hair removal with sort of a workhorse device called the Cynosure Icon. It's sort of an IPL, but very focused wavelengths, more like a laser type IPL. And that's how we handle hair removal.
Okay.
I haven't heard the word electrolysis in probably about 10 years or so, but we don't offer it. Many years ago, in my old practice at Light Touch, we were a dominant laser hair removal player. Right now, we're a dominant, filler injectable business. So we do offer laser hair removal, but it's not something that is, core to what we do.
Thank you.
There's many devices out there for laser hair removal, and there's so many that actually that's some of the downward pressure. You can probably buy a device that's a few years old and get a very effective laser for most skin types, not all skin types, for hair removal.
In terms of stimulating patient traffic, is now a good time to expand your business or add new locations?
How brave are you?
I'm doing it. Yeah, we're in the process of doing it, but we believe we have the infrastructure and the revenues to support it. But we're doing it cautiously optimistic as well. So we're not just expanding beyond our means. So we do it judiciously.
And we have another question from the audience in terms of tightening of regulations. Is there going to be any tightening for operators?
I'm sorry, the question?
Sorry, will we see a tightening of regulations for operators in terms of training?
You know, it's interesting. We provide both nurse and PA clinical trainers for the practices. And a lot of our products, we really request that folks do some training first before they try, for instance, a thread, for instance, that kind of training. So I do think that most of the companies, the clinical training side, they either have consultant clinical trainers or they have their own staff. Back at Bioform, we had 40 nurse PAs who did the training for us on just an injectable. So I think the trend towards the companies providing clinical training, whether it be the folks that come out and train in your practice, or whether we, for instance, at Suneva right now, we have about 12 practices where we can send folks to be trained as well. So either way, but the clinical training part, we think is kind of the responsibility of the company to make sure that the folks are trained well in the procedures and the treatments, and especially in our products. So I do think training it's going to be more available going forward, and I think companies are going to add more clinical trainers to their staffs.
So if you look at the hourly costs of esthetician versus nurse practitioner, registered nurse, PA, there's a huge spread. And so I think there's normally the industry gravitates to sort of, using the lowest cost person. And it's really an issue of enforcement. So each state has different regulations. So, can an esthetician operate a cool sculpting device in New York? Probably not a good idea. But if that esthetician is trained and if you don't harm the patient, it's then an issue of enforcement. So each state has about 2 or 3 people that are enforcing these regulations, and it's all about protecting the patient. So I think it's something that in this environment you want to be compliant, and it's never fun to have the people with the windbreakers show up at your business with a cease and desist order. But I think there are a lot of violations out there, and it really needs to be cleaned up.
It's interesting, just a quick thing, is that as these new products and things we never thought about come out there, like what Dennis is talking about, we didn't think about what he was doing and selling in Suneva 5 years ago. And believe me, the legislatures are still working on stuff from 20 and 30 years ago. Right. So, the regulations, who the heck knows, because we'll tell you in 15 years if what Dennis is selling for the last 5 years is going to be regulated, because that's about how long it's going to take them.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see the companies they really are taking responsibility on training people when they're selling products, because they're trying to head off problems before they start. And if they're successful at that, then I think there won't be regulations.
Yeah.
If they're unsuccessful at that, there will be regulations.
It is interesting, though, there are, for instance, in some of the devices like microneedling and plasma devices, et cetera, you do have a lot of folks who are outselling, quote, un-FDA approved devices. And so a lot of that is going on. The FDA doesn't seem to be coming down that as much as they used to. Maybe they're just too busy doing other things. But it is important. When you have an issue with a device, important to have a company that is actually FDA approved, cleared, or whatever. They'll be on your side, and so that's a key part of using approved devices. And again, I'm surprised, having gone through the whole breast implant crisis many years ago with the FDA. I certainly learned my lesson about the FDA and approved devices. So it is important, I would highly recommend to the audience that they really understand whether or not a device is actually FDA approved, or whether or not somebody's just saying it's a class 1 device and they're just outselling it. So something to check on.
Very good.
Yeah, I would just add, one of the issues we're having is actually just scaling our injectable business throughout the country, because of the fact that it's very hard to recruit excellent injectors. So we're finding the need to create our own training program to help facilitate our growth. Because I think the demand for filler and toxin has outpaced the ability provided from really good, medical professionals. Obviously the plastic surgeons of the world, like Dr. Richards, are doing a lot of surgery, and many of the plastic surgeons are not really interested in injecting, a lot of these products because they can make more money, doing surgical procedures, and this pretty much has become a registered nurse, nurse practitioner, PA type of business. And it's also been a little bit of the Wild West out there, because you have a lot of these RNs who work for, larger, medical spas or dermatology offices or plastic surgeons who've created a little bit of a following for themselves and have gone off on their own and try to figure out ways to keep some of their customer base. And a lot of them are doing it kind of illegally and risking their license of doing it without, without a medical director in some cases. They're purchasing product where they shouldn't be purchasing product from. So there's a lot of things going on in the industry because people see there's a significant amount of revenue to be made. So a lot of these nurses and PAs just coming out of school are taking some risks, somewhat out of either greed or just out of just not knowing some of the implications, how it could affect their license.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend staying away from unapproved devices. I mean, the sort of dark web out there is Alibaba. If you pick up a so-called M-Sculpt for $25,000 on Alibaba, it may actually work. However, these things are generally not properly grounded. One of the things that the FDA does is they manage to operator exposure. So you may, shock and kill your esthetician with the fake M-Sculpt, which will definitely put you out of business, and not something you really want to be associated with. But it's a lot of this stuff comes out of China, or the parts come out of China and get assembled in California or other states. So, but it's I think better to take a different approach and maybe do threading instead of trying to figure out which device is going to be the blockbuster to beat cool sculpting.
Well, in the essence of time, we are almost at 75 minutes. I am going to wrap it up unless any of our panelists have final comments, final takeaways that you want to share. No. In that case, I want to thank each and every one of you, Dr. Richards, Mark, Dennis, and Jim, for participating today. I want to give a special thank you to Jim at Bridgewater Holdings. So everybody knows that's on the line. All of these gentlemen are great resources for you guys. Bridgewater Holdings is a resource for medical spas and medical practices who are looking for advice or counsel on growth strategies, whether it's financial or driven by treatment modalities, new treatments they can add. Feel free to reach out to me directly or MedResults, and we'd be happy to put you in touch with anyone if you have additional comments or questions. But until then, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you staying the full 75 minutes with us. And we hope to see you on the next webinar presentation. Thank you and have a great evening.